The sea doesn't forget. It only waits until you come back to listen. I hadn't set foot in Harborview in almost 10 years. From the highway turnout, the town still looked arranged the way a child draws one. A row of salt-bent cottages clinging to the cliff, a dented harbor stitched with ropes and masts, the lighthouse pulsing every 12 seconds as if it remembered someone's heartbeat and refused to let it stop. But when I stepped off the bus, the smell had changed. Less clean salt, more rust and diesel, like time had been leaking into the water and no one cared to name it. I told myself I was there for paperwork, my mother's estate, a small house on Cliff Road I'd somehow never managed to sell. That got me onto the bus. What got me off it was a different truth. I wanted an answer to a question that had learned to ask itself in my sleep. Her, Claire. We'd been married 9 years in Harborview, and then one morning she was gone. No fight, no slammed door, just a closet with its left side empty, and a coffee cup rinsed and turned upside down on the rack like a polite apology. People said she'd left with someone. People always say that when they can't understand why silence hurts more than noise. The key still worked. The door still stuck. Inside, the house had learned to breathe without us. Dust laid itself down in even layers. Light searched old paths. The floorboard in the hall complained at the weight of my return. I put my bag by the sofa and stood a long time in the doorway to the kitchen, where she used to draw tide lines on the calendar and circle mornings in red. Good light for the cliffs, she'd say, and leave before I could pretend not to worry. I slept 2 hours that first night and woke to the sound of waves like a familiar stranger knocking. By habit, I made coffee too strong and drank it by the window where the lighthouse blinked like someone practicing telling the truth. That's when the knocking started for real, 2 polite taps, then a pause. The woman on the porch wore a navy windbreaker with Harborview Police stitched in gold. Ponytail. Gray eyes that didn't get fooled by fog. Mr. Whitaker? Yes. I'm Detective Lauren Cates. Sorry to come by so early. She looked past me at the interior the way people do when they're about to offer you a choice disguised as information. We've reopened an old case. I thought you should hear it from me. What case? Your wife's. The word wife landed in the kitchen and stood there, uncertain whether it had permission to sit. I thought that was closed, I said. It was, she said. Until last week. Fishermen brought up a box in their trawl nets off Drift Point. Inside were personal items, waterlogged, some sealed. One photograph carries your wife's initials and a date written in ink. 2 weeks before she disappeared. I put the coffee down. My hand was steady and I resented the steadiness. What else was in the box? We'd prefer to show you, if you're willing. We drove the first mile in silence. Harborview hadn't moved any buildings since I'd left, but somehow everything had shifted an inch to the left, the way furniture looks after a party where you weren't invited. You haven't been back since she went missing? Cates asked. No, I said. I didn't see the point. The thing about points, she said, is they're sharp. They usually find you. Drift Point isn't much rock like wrestled iron and a strip of pebbled beach the tide bullies twice a day. 2 officers stood by a sawhorse with yellow tape that meant rules had applied here recently. Under plastic sheeting lay a small wooden chest the size of a shoebox, salt eaten at the corners, its lid stained with something like old tea. Found snagged in the nets of the sea lark, Kate said. They upended it onto deck thinking it was a crab pot. It wasn't. Gloves, cutters, a careful motion. Inside, the smell of old paper and iodine rose like a memory that had stayed wet too long. There were envelopes in waxed sleeves, a tarnished locket, a Polaroid photograph I remembered taking the light on Claire's hair, the curve of her cheek as she looked away at gulls elbowing the air for compost. In the margin, in her hand, initials, C.W., and a tiny sketch of a triangle like a child's idea of a mountain. I pointed. She used to mark our picnic spots like that, I said. Triangles for coves, circles for the higher paths. We had a whole language like that. I thought it would matter forever. Detective Cates studied the Polaroid, then me, then the horizon where the fog kept its own counsel. We think the chest was meant to be found, she said. Not in a week, not in 10 years, but eventually. By who? I asked. You, she said. or someone who could tell you the story you weren't given. I opened one of the wax sleeves and slid out a folded sheet of paper. It had been written in fountain pen, and the ink had bled into the fibers like a bruise. Tide times, a list of dates, the words North Cove twice, and the name Mallory in a smaller, more uncertain hand. Evan Mallory, the summer painter who'd rented the boathouse at the marina 2 months before Claire vanished. I hadn't thought about him in years, except when I did. Did you look into him back then? I asked. We did, Kate said. He left town the week your wife did. No forwarding address, no family who'd claim him, cash renter, paid in advance, no record of a driver's license in the state. The day he turned in the boathouse key, your wife's bank card was used to buy 2 ferry tickets to Black Hook Island. Neither ticket was scanned. You think they ran together? The sentence came out like someone else was asking for permission to be angry. I think at a minimum they knew each other, she said, and I think you were meant to find something at the North Cove. Your old map might tell us what. On the living room wall of the house on Cliff Road, our Old Bay map still hung, corners curled in, one thumbtack missing where we'd promised to replace it. Claire's red circles dotted the coastline like a rash. Light at noon here, difficult footing here, bring boots here, remember to breathe here. The third mark north of Drift Point had a triangle with a dot inside it. She'd used that only twice. What's the dot? Kate asked. Cash, I said. Sometimes she'd leave me notes if we were hiking different trails. Pencil under a rock, air in a cramped place, that sort of romance. Do you think she left you a note that day? I think if she did, the tide has been arguing with it for a decade, I said. But I was already lacing my boots. At the northern cove, the sea had chewed a hollow into the cliff, where the rock was softer than it pretended. The tide was out, the lip of the hollow only shoulder high, its interior smelling of old kelp and the kind of damp that teaches fungus vocabulary. I slid inside on my hip and felt for a shelf. On the third pass, my fingers hit metal, a bottle cap nailed into the rock as a marker, the way she used to do when she hid a note from the wind. Beneath it, a rusted tin, and inside that, a damp scrap of paper wrapped in oilskin, the corner nibbled by a creature that knew how to edit. I unrolled it with the care we reserve for injuries. Her handwriting yawed across the page where water had bullied it, but the words still knew themselves. If you're reading this, we're already past the part where I get to choose. He isn't what I said he was. The letters weren't from a gallery. Please don't come to the boathouse. If anyone asks, I went to sketch the lighthouse and lost track of time. I'm sorry for all the ways I kept the tide to myself. See, I read it 3 times and then didn't read it again because I wanted to be sure it would change if I refused to name it out loud. Letters, Detective Kate said. What letters? Ichorn. She'd been getting mail at the marina, I said. I thought it was from a gallery in the city. She said it was about a showing she was considering. I never saw one. I didn't push. I thought I was being a good husband by trusting the version of the story I wanted. Did she ever say the name of the gallery? South Pier Collective, I said. And the words tasted fine until I remembered the day I'd looked it up and found a website with photographs of small work tables and big windows and people wearing aprons in a light that had already forgiven them. It had felt plausible the way a certain kind of lie is shaped to fit. Kate's took a photo of the note on her phone with the neat efficiency of someone who knows how quickly a person can talk themselves out of evidence. The boathouse is still empty, she said. We can look. We didn't find much in the daylight. The boathouse had been painted twice since the summer Mallory left. The new owner used it to store traps and buckets and the hard promise of other seasons. But boards remember. Under the stairs, in a hollow between joists, my hand came back dirty with salt grit and a ribbon of green cloth I recognized from a skirt Claire wore on Thursdays when she wanted to convince herself the week still deserved hope. I held it between thumb and forefinger, like people hold ghosts in movies, and then dropped it into an evidence bag because Detective Cates was watching and I needed to cooperate with the person in the room who understood how the law prefers its grief. We found the letters that night, the way you always find the thing that matters when the light has decided you've behaved enough to be trusted. It wasn't the boathouse. It was my mother's house in the attic, in the trunk that used to hold Christmas ornaments, and a folded map of a camping trip we never took. At the bottom, under newspaper sheets someone had used as packing a lifetime ago, sat a craft paper envelope tied with twine. My name on the front in a hand that didn't belong to my wife. Inside 9 letters, each in a different envelope, none addressed to me, all addressed to Claire Whittaker at a P.O. box I didn't know she'd been paying for. The postmark on the earliest was May. The latest, 3 days before the morning the closet emptied itself. I didn't read them all in order. I did what men do when we are certain we're about to be left by the story. We reach for the one that confirms we are right to be afraid. He wrote like an art teacher who believed adjectives could improve moral character. He wrote about light, about risk, about the moral duty to seek. He wrote about secrecy as if it were a compliment. And in the third letter, in a paragraph that tried to sound like mentorship but bared its teeth, he wrote, "When you lift the envelope from Paul, put it inside the sketchbook. Don't bring it through the front door. The clock has eyes." I read that sentence until it stopped looking like English. "Paul?" I said. "Paul Harker?" Detective Kate sat back on her heels. "Owner of the marina. He takes cash for small packages for half the town. Boats bring in parts. Boat people don't like receipts. Could be innocent." "Could be," I said. It wasn't. The last letter was short and in decent confidence. "Tomorrow, dawn tide, Drift Point. If you're late, we wait for no one. Put the locket in your pocket and walk slow. If anyone asks, you never met me. There are voices you think you'll recognize only in person." It turned out I knew this one fine on paper. "You think he was trafficking something?" I asked. "Art? People?" "Letters don't always signal crimes," Kate said, "but they rarely signal generosity. And a woman doesn't leave the closet empty for a man who writes like a pamphlet unless he has persuaded her that leaving is the only door that still opens." "Or unless she planned to come back," I said, because the part of me that refused to die in chronological order. "The locket," I added, holding up the one from the box recovered at sea. Inside, a photograph of Claire as a child sat beside a crescent of blonde hair from a time before we met. On the back of the locket, scratched hard and shallow so only fingers could read, the number 12. "Every 12 seconds," I said. "The lighthouse, blink." "Meet at the most obvious clock in town," Kate said. "If you're trying to disappear, it's a decent joke." We made a plan we pretended was not one. In the morning, she talked to Paul. I'd walk to the lighthouse and look for an oversight the first search missed. We'd reconvene without promising to. Kellen, the lighthouse keeper, had not gotten younger. He looked like men look when they're trying to break ties to the future, using only cigarettes and superstition. "You again," he said, which in his language meant an apology for not avoiding this from me. "Did you see her the week she left?" I asked. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Sat on the steps 3 nights running, drew the light like it was a man who might forget she existed if she stopped paying attention." He gestured to the door. "We looked. Back then. Coast Guard. Deputies. Her name never came off the list, but I didn't show anyone this." Inside, in the closet beside the oil tanks, he moved a crate of rags to reveal a second crate with its bottom cut out. In the hollow, a tin box with a hinged lid. Inside that, cables, a small radio transceiver, a pocket knife, and a ferry ticket stub to Black Hook Island, dated the morning she vanished. The ticket was for one. "She put that there the night before," Kellen said. "Asked me to keep it. Swore she'd be back by the 4 o'clock blink. She wasn't." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because people love making the wrong thing important," he said. "If you'd seen the look on her face, you'd have believed her too." On my way back across the headland, I saw Paul before he saw me. He stood on the pier with Detective Cates, hands on hips in the posture of men who want to own the angle of the conversation. When he turned, his expression was the expression of a person counting his options into a corner. "You helped her," I said. "I helped everybody," he said. "It's a marina." "Did you know who he was?" I asked. "Mallory." "I knew he wasn't Mallory," Paul said. Then he flinched because saying the quiet part out loud tends to hurry the future. "What was his real name?" Cates asked. He swallowed. "Julian Pike. That's the name that came on the package that first week. He asked me to sign. Said if anyone asked, he painted, because people are too bored to argue with a vocation." "What was in the packages?" Cates asked. "Mail," he said. "Thin stuff. Not heavy. Could be nothing. Could be everything." He looked out at the boats instead of at me. I didn't know. You can't call a man a storm just because the dock creaks. Did Claire ever pick up a package? I asked. Every Tuesday, he said. And the day hit me in the ribs because every Tuesday had been the day I stayed late at the shop and texted her to say not to wait, as if anyone in our house had still been waiting for anyone by then. What happened that morning? Kate's asked. Tell it exactly. She came at 6:07, coffee in a thermos, sketchbook under her arm, said she was going up to the cliffs when she got something from the box. He pointed to the row of mailboxes bolted to the wall. She took a manila envelope out of number 12. 12, I said. He nodded. We made a joke about the blink. She smiled like she meant to apply it to the day. That's it. What about the man? Kate asked. Pike. Came by half an hour later, Paul said. Asked if she'd collected. When I said yes, he looked at the water like it had been rude. What did he do then? Walked to the end of the pier, got in a skiff, and set off east like he owned a problem out there and had decided to forgive it. What boat? Kate asked. Not mine, he said, which in Harbor View is the same sentence as I'd like my lawyer. We didn't arrest him because we didn't have anything yet that the part of the law that doesn't believe in grief understands as proof. We left him on the pier with his hands and his account and the comfort of people who have gotten away with things so long they believe they got away with being the kind of person who would do them. Kate's walked me toward town. If Pike was using a fake name, he may have been using fake work, she said. Art is a gentle cover for trafficking information, money, pills. The packages were thin. He could have been moving coordinates, access codes, burner sims. But Harborview isn't a hub. It's a dock, I said. People pass through and pay cash to care less about the ones they leave. Did she know? She asked. Your wife. Did she know who he was? That note in the cove says she learned. Too late. Why didn't she come to you? I opened my mouth to lie and closed it. Because I had become the kind of man who believed things would stay where he put them. That night I read the letters in order. I let each one instruct the next, the way a patient teacher instructs a clumsy hand. Early on, you are the only one who understands light the way a camera fears it. Later, the envelope arrived. Keep it under the sketch paper until I say. Later still, burn this after reading. She hadn't. The last one didn't say tomorrow. It said, if you see me before the blink, do not speak my name. I dreamed the ocean came up the steps and rang the doorbell with seaweed fingers. When I opened the door, the air smelled of iodine and something like the truth. At dawn, my phone buzzed. Detective Cates. Come to the station. You need to see this. In a room that didn't deserve the word interview, she slid a tablet across the table. Harbor camera archives from the week before Claire disappeared. We don't keep the footage this long, but the museum digitized a bunch of reels from an old security project. The marina's cam was working that Tuesday. The screen showed grainy morning, gulls, a fog of breath, a handful of fishermen arguing with thermoses. The timestamp said 6:11. Claire stepped into frame like a person who still believed in her body. She wore the green skirt with leggings, boots, a sweater she'd stretched the sleeves on. She stopped at the box labeled 12, took an envelope, slid it into the sketchbook. She looked toward the end of the pier, considered the light, and then looked straight up at the camera, like she'd known it would always be I who watched. She lifted her hand toward her chest, the tiniest gesture, and touched the locket. Then she walked north toward the headland. 6 minutes later, a man with a beanie and a painter's satchel turned the corner into frame, too careful not to be hurried. He looked like a sketch of confidence done by a person who'd only met the idea in books. He didn't go to the box. He went to Paul. Paul nodded. The man stepped to the edge, looked at the water a long time, and smiled like he had decided to take credit for the tide. Pike, Kate said, or whatever he was calling himself. We kept watching because there was nothing left to do but be the kind of people who earn minutes. At 9:40, a skiff rounded the outer buoy and cut its engine 100 yards out, riding the swell. No one on the pier moved. No one on camera looked east. The skiff bobbed, then revved and cut west again. The timestamp rolled to 10:03. Sun inched up. Someone laughed at something that wasn't funny on film. There's a weather station on the headland, Kate said. Motion capture for drift logs. It doesn't show people, it shows patterns. At 10:02, there was an anomaly, something heavy entering the water off the North Cove. Something heavy, I said, not someone. The station can't tell the difference, she said. It only calls wait. What about her phone? I asked because men in bad news always ask small technical questions when the room gets storm-colored. Last ping on her handset was at 9:50, Kate said. North Cove. Then nothing. She could have dropped it, I said. Thrown it. She could have handed it to someone who turned it off, Kate said, and then left before anyone thought to look. We didn't talk about the box in the nets. We didn't name it a message. We took our coats and let Harbor View push air around us like it had been waiting to ask if we intended to believe in anything now that there were pictures. I went to the lighthouse because the number on the locket seemed to insist. Kellen let me onto the catwalk with a gesture that said he'd already done this twice in his head while I was still learning the word okay. The sea rolled its shoulders and let wave tops show their teeth. The rocks at North Cove wore their muscles like a bruise. I leaned into wind that nearly made a religion of me and tried to ask a question that didn't sound like begging. The radio in the keeper's room barked. Kellen answered, then shouted up the stairwell. Station says a vessel's moored outside the limits. No flag, no AIS, no good reason. I went down the steps in a run that remembered being 30. On the headland trail, I met Detective Cates coming up like a decision. We stood together in the place where the path looks down at the little bite the sea takes when it wants to teach you humility. The vessel sat beyond the buoy line, 35 feet. White hull, stained with the kind of neglect that doesn't come from storms. No name on her stern, no one on deck. A flagstaff bare in a way that's against more laws than one. You think, I began. Don't, she said, because names summon. We called it in. A harbor patrol boat puttered out with the official slowness of people who have learned that rushing makes bad decisions sweat. The patrol circled, hailed, circled again, then bumped lightly along the hull like a dog, insolently ignoring a nap. An officer stepped onto the deck with the practiced boredom of someone who knows heroism and paperwork start the same way. A minute passed. He reappeared at the gunwale and lifted a hand with a motion that meant, "You should come see what we've been practicing to find." The cabin smelled of mold and metal and a sweet chemical that made the back of my throat think of hospitals. On a shelf above the navigation table, duct taped to wood scarred by other priorities, lay a spiral-bound notebook with South Pier Collective printed on its cover, the same font as the website that had looked so tidy. Inside, tide tables, lists of numbers organized as if pretending not to be money is enough. The names of 3 harbors, one circled twice. At the back, a photograph stapled to paper, curling at the corners. It was a picture of the lighthouse from the catwalk, taken at dawn, with Claire in the right of frame, her hair hiding her ear, the locket visible, the light catching the edge of her jaw like it was a map still being drawn. On the desk under the notebook sat an envelope addressed to no one. Inside, a single sheet, typed. Pretending is the easiest way to live. Some of us get better at it. Meetings are over. Clean up the loose ends. His boat, Kate said. Or his kind of boat, I said. There's a marina on Black Hook that doesn't mind cash and avoids paperwork. She said, "We'll send a team." She looked at me. "We don't need you to come." "I know," I said, and then took my feet in the direction of the pier anyway, because wanting to be useful is a habit it turns out I was willing to relearn. We didn't find a body. We found a list of names in a drawer that could be passwords or inventory, or the names of people who will never know they've been cataloged. We found a coil of rope the wrong length for any honest job. We found a camera with a memory card that had suffered a maritime accident more painful than most. We found sticker residue where a name had been on the stern and removed. The Harbor Patrol took statements, photographs, leaning. The sea looked briefly ashamed of its industry and then went on, making itself look nice for tourists who wouldn't arrive for 2 months. That evening, as fog pressed its face to the windows of the house on Cliff Road, I laid the letters on the kitchen table like a map I had refused to read before I set out. I set the locket to one side. I put the radio transceiver Kellen had kept for a decade beside it and turned the dial in a motion that felt indecent, like listening at a door you no longer had a right to stand near. Static, pilot chatter, a song from a country station in a town that had chosen to be happy on purpose. At one point, the machine whistled and hissed like it was remembering a language. Then a voice broke through, female, older, laughing, saying coordinates for a crab line that none of us own anymore. "If you're reading this, we're already past the part where I get to choose," she'd written. I imagined her at this table, pen leaking on her fingers, forehead folded at the bridge where a headache lives. I imagined her weighing fates like fruit and picking the firm ones. I imagined her deciding to come back. I imagined the ocean reminding her that plans involving the ocean should be written in pencil. Close to midnight, my phone rang. Detective Cates. "We have something," she said. "Not a body, not yet. At Black Hook, there's a storage locker rented under the name Mallory 3 months before your wife went missing. We got a warrant." Inside, 2 canvases of seascapes, not his, signed by women whose galleries we called, who said they'd never sold to him, never heard of him, never would. A suitcase with women's clothing in your wife's size, and a box of burner phones, 11 of them. One was charged. It had a single contact loaded. A timestamp recent. The number's yours. "That doesn't make sense," I said, which is such a useless sentence, I was embarrassed to hear my mouth use it. "The call wasn't placed," she said. "It was scheduled for tomorrow, 12 wash, noon blink." "You think he was going to call me?" "I think whoever controlled that locker planned to call you at the Lighthouse and offer you something you've been starving for." "What?" "An ending," she said. "Or a new version of the beginning that would hurt less." "I'll be there," I said. "You won't be alone," she said. The morning walked in like it had been taught to. I climbed to the catwalk with Kellen's blessing and a thermos of coffee that tasted like a job. Detective Cates stood on the inland path with 2 officers pretending to admire the charming inefficiency of gulls. At 11:58, wind stretched its arms. At 12 the lighthouse blinked. My phone rang. Unknown. 12. "Don't answer," Kate said in my ear because I'd left the line open for her. "Let it go to voicemail." I let it ring 3 times and then swiped. I didn't speak. A man's voice, imported from the memory of every applause he'd ever given himself. "Daniel," he said like he was disappointed in me for being a noun. "You made it home." Silence except for weather. "You want to know where she is," he said. "You want the story that makes you a good man for not insisting you were owed something you never earned." Static broke on the line like a wave. The voice continued, still capable of admiring itself. "You were never my problem. You were her disguise. I'd thank you, but I don't tip furniture. This is what you need to hear. She got off the boat because she realized she was not going to be the person she thought she could be if she stayed on it. She went over on the north side at the bend in the rocks, where the light drags its feet. She swam. She made it. After that, neither of us saw her again." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked before I remembered I wasn't supposed to talk. "Because I'm generous when I'm finished," he said, "and because you won't be able to use this. It's not evidence. It's mercy. I'm leaving the coast, Daniel. The work is inland now. Tell Lauren Cates she was good at her job. That's the compliment she wanted from a man like me. Goodbye." The line cut. The blink blinked. Between them, gulls wrote rude words in air, the way they always do when men speak too loudly on cliffs. We traced the call. Burners traced to horizon lines and bad stories. The storage locker had been emptied 5 hours earlier by a man wearing a ball cap and a scarf. The camera saw him, disagreed to identify him, and the ferry timetable proved that if someone wanted to slip out between responsibility and arrogance, Harborview is still a willing accomplice. We never found a body. We found a harbor master on Black Hook who remembered a woman renting a skiff for cash the afternoon. Claire vanished, returning it at dusk, with her hair glued to her skull, and a look that decided against telling anyone anything. We found a bait shop clerk who said a woman had bought bandages and iodine that evening, paid double, and asked for a plastic bag to keep them dry. We found a retired teacher who said a girl with C in her voice had slept the night on a church pew and left a note that said, "Thank you for the roof." We found a bus schedule with a gap big enough to hide a decision in. I didn't go to the city to look for her. I thought about it. I thought about it the way people think about taking their right hand and putting it into a machine to find out if pain still exists. Instead, I stayed the week and put my mother's house in order and turned the radio off and on until weather sounded like agreement. I walked the headland, the North Cove, the hollow in the rock where she'd left me a note that apologized for sharing the tide with someone else. On the last night, I took the locket to the pier and sat where the camera had watched us all with the fairness of bad lenses. I held the locket in my palm until the number 12 warmed. I spoke to the tide in a voice I hoped would pass as local. If you kept her, I said to the sea, tell me you did it out of love. If you let her go, tell me where. If she left because I built us a house where only one of us knew what home was, teach me to stop building that kind of house. An old fisherman with a face like a cherished map sat beside me without asking and unwrapped a sandwich with the reverence of prayer. He ate half, offered me the rest, and we looked at the horizon like it owed us both money. After a time, he said, the trick isn't forgiving the person who left on you. It's not turning into a person who leaves on other people because you think it gives you back what you lost. I don't know how, I said. Good, he said. You start there. I left Harborview in the morning. I had promised myself I wouldn't. The bus wheezed its way up the grade. The lighthouse blinked. The sea rehearsed its same line and delivered it with the kind of professionalism that makes you forget it's already been said. My phone buzzed once with a number I didn't know. I didn't answer. The voicemail transcribed itself into a grammar that made it look like the words had been sent by a person who didn't know how to be careful. It said, Daniel, if this is still your number, I'm sorry. I thought I was saving something. I didn't. I'm all right. Please don't come. See. The bus lost a bar of reception. The message kept its shape anyway. In the city, I returned to a small apartment that had learned not to expect me. I hung the locket by the window and set the letters in a box marked evidence of trying. I made a list inside the cupboard, the way I had promised the better version of me I would. Fixable, not fixable. On the fixable side, I wrote, hinges, poor lighting, silence used as punishment, the belief that love owes you instructions. On the not fixable side, I wrote, the tide, other people's reasons, the habit of believing a chapter that isn't yours is an epilogue you're allowed to write. Sometimes I take a train to the coast that isn't Harborview and sit where the water performs indifference. I bring a book and read the same page for an hour. I still think about her, not with the old sting, with something like respect for a person who discovered she had been telling the wrong story about herself and changed genres mid-sentence. The detective texts once a month. Still looking. She doesn't mean the case. She means the way a human keeps their eyes pointed. The ending, such as it is, arrived in an envelope without a return address and a postmark from a city that has better work than offering me comfort. Inside, a single photograph. A storefront window in some inland neighborhood. Glass clean with the patience of people who believe light is a currency. In the reflection, a woman in a green scarf with her back to the camera, head tilted, as if arranging an object inside. In the corner, in marker, a number, 12. I turned the photograph over. Nothing else. I sat with it until afternoon became the kind of blue that makes you forgive winter for existing. Then I hung the picture beside the locket, where the breeze can teach both to move. Sometimes, at noon, I ring a small bell I bought at a hardware store that would have sold me forgiveness if it had stocked it. The bell sounds thin and honest. The sea doesn't forget. Neither do we. We just learn which memories we're willing to let go of first. And if I ever go back to Harborview, I'll walk to the lighthouse at the blink and stand where the catwalk stops and the air begins. I'll watch the North Cove and the hard bend in the rocks where the light drags its feet. If someone comes out of the fog wearing a scarf the color of deciding, I'll let her speak first. If no one comes, I'll listen to the water tell me the same story again, about weight and drift and the mercy we owe the versions of ourselves who stayed too long on the wrong boat. Either way, I'll be there a while. Either way, the tide will make room.